Griffin, Georgia, August 1, 2018. The sky was still and heavy, blanketing the quiet neighborhood of Sunnybrook Drive in warm summer silence. Inside one modest home, something unspeakable had just happened. A young man, Stephen Freeman, lay limp on a blood-soaked mattress, a bullet lodged in his chest, his breathing already stopped. Beside him knelt the woman he'd loved since he was 16, Mary Katherine. Her hands were shaking, stained with his blood. Her cries were frantic, desperate, and looping. It was an accident. Oh God, it was an accident. The air inside the room was thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. Nothing was broken. No signs of a struggle. Just the suffocating stillness that follows sudden violence. By the time the red and blue lights sliced through the night and paramedics burst in, it was too late. The only thing left to rescue was the truth, but that would turn out to be far more complicated. What was supposed to be a quiet night between two people trying to heal the cracks in their relationship turned into a death scene that would divide more than a courtroom. It would fracture two families, rip through a community, and leave a jury struggling to understand what love turns into when it festers in silence. This is not the story it pretended to be. This is the story of a man who trusted too much, and a woman whose truth was far more dangerous than anyone imagined. This is the case of Stephen Freeman and Mary Katherine, a relationship so intertwined, it would take a bullet to pull it apart. The boy who found home in the wild. Born on January 1, 1995, Stephen Freeman came into the world with a kind of brightness that never left him. His parents moved from Thomas to Griffin shortly after, eager to raise their children somewhere quiet, grounded, safe. Stephen grew up with love poured into every corner of his life. His family wasn't rich, but they were devoted. He and his brother were raised with the kind of emotional attention most children only dream of. In return, Stephen gave the world his whole heart. He had a way of making people feel seen, really seen. The kind of person who never showed up empty-handed and never let anyone sit alone. Teachers loved him. Neighbors smiled when they saw him coming. His joy was effortless, but it wasn't shallow. Nature called to him like a second home. Hiking. Fishing. Hunting. Camping. Those weren't just hobbies. They were where he went to breathe, to think, to reset. Out there in the trees and rivers, Stephen wasn't escaping life, he was returning to it. But it was his mother who lit the deepest part of his heart. When she returned to school to get her diploma, Stephen watched her study late into the night, tired but determined. He wrote her a letter after she graduated. It wasn't long or dramatic, just real. Just proud. The kind of letter that stays folded in a drawer forever. She wasn't like the others. Mary Katherine was a year older when Stephen first noticed her in high school. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she had a pull, confidence wrapped in softness. Their connection was instant. In a sea of teenage drama and flings, they somehow felt permanent. She loved the same wild things he did, fishing trips, campfires, woods at night. She handled herself like one of the guys, but Stephen's friends saw quickly she was more than that. She was his anchor and his spark. Mary Katherine had been raised in a loving home too. As a child, she was the entertainer, singing for relatives, dancing through the living room barefoot. She had a glow to her, a charm that made people lean in when she talked. After high school, they moved in together. Stephen took a job with a roofing company. Mary Katherine became a teaching assistant at a nearby kindergarten. Their lives looked simple from the outside, sweet even. Two small-town kids building something that looked a lot like forever. But 7 years is a long time to love someone. It changes. It frays. They fought. Took space. Came back. Fought again. There was love, but it had sharp edges now. Still, their families had merged as if marriage was already on the table. Mary Katherine was at every Sunday dinner. Stephen's mother treated her like blood. Holidays, birthdays, everything, they were already one unit. But love has a way of hiding rot. From the outside, it looked like a bond that could survive anything. But from the inside, it was ticking. Just before 11 p.m., the stillness of Sunnybrook Drive was shattered by the piercing wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flickered against the modest homes like a warning from another world. An ambulance skidded to a halt in front of the Freeman residence. Seconds later, a police cruiser followed. Inside, time had already fractured. The 911 call had come through minutes earlier. On the line, Mary Katherine Hickden, frantic, incoherent, and drowning in hysteria. It was an accident, oh God. I didn't mean to, please help him. Please. Her words tumbled over sobs, barely understandable. She claimed she had accidentally shot her boyfriend, Stephen Freeman. The story she gasped out was thin and jagged. She had just been handing him a gun, unaware it was loaded. Something went wrong. The weapon fired. But nothing in that room felt like a simple accident. When the first responders stepped inside, they found Stephen lying on a mattress in the living room, his blood soaking into the fabric beneath him. He wasn't gone, not yet. His pulse fluttered, shallow but defiant. Every breath was a war. Beside him, Mary Katherine was a storm of grief. She was kneeling next to his body, her hands trembling, her face streaked with tears and fear. When paramedics tried to push her back to reach him, she refused to move. She clung to his limp arm as if her grip alone could keep him alive. Don't take him from me. I can't lose him. Her cries were primal. Unrelenting. Finally, the medics got to work. Stephen was rushed to the hospital, sirens screaming again into the night. But the apartment he left behind was already telling its own version of the story, and it didn't match hers. A scene that didn't match the tears. Once Stephen was gone, officers turned to Mary Katherine. She was still crumpled on the floor, soaked in panic. Her breathing was erratic. Words came in pieces. But she kept repeating the same desperate line. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't know it was loaded. I wasn't even pointing it at him. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her hands were shaking. She looked like a woman shattered by grief. But trained eyes saw more than sorrow. They saw inconsistencies. First, there was the room itself. The kitchen was in chaos. Cabinets flung open. Food strewn across the counters and floor. Silverware scattered. A box of cereal torn and bleeding its contents. It didn't look like a house where someone had calmly handed over a gun. It looked like a house where a fight had erupted, where someone had lost control. And then, there was her breath. Officers smelled alcohol. Her words were slurred at times, her sentences looping back on themselves. Her sobs didn't stop, but they came with moments of strange clarity, as if she was remembering a script. Despite her emotional state, she didn't resist when officers told her she needed to come in for questioning. She climbed into the cruiser without a struggle. It wasn't an arrest, not yet. But it was clear, Mary Katherine Hickden's story needed to be told again, this time under a brighter light. Cracks in the story. At the station, she was still raw. Still shaken. But she never stopped insisting it was an accident. She told detectives that she and Stephen had always loved firearms. Hunting was their shared escape. They had multiple guns, but never kept them loaded. The one she handed him that night. She claimed she didn't know it had a round chambered. The discharge was a tragic mistake, she said. But then, mid-conversation, something slipped. When I threw the gun to Stephen, it just went off. Silence. The room shifted. Earlier, she'd said she was handing him the weapon. Now she just said she'd thrown it. It was a crucial difference, one that blew a hole in her version of events. And for investigators, this was a turning point. A gun girl who should have known better. This wasn't a woman unfamiliar with weapons. Mary Katherine worked part-time at a local gun shop. She wasn't just trained, she was fluent in firearms. Safety protocols were part of her job. She often told customers she knew more about guns than most men she met, even more than Stephen. So for her to throw a loaded gun, it wasn't just careless. It was unbelievable. To police, it was as if a certified lifeguard had let someone drown in shallow water. The claim didn't align with her knowledge, her background, or her behavior. And yet, she was still crying. Still clutching her own arms like they could hold her together. "He was my best friend," she whispered. "I would never hurt him." But the officers had stopped listening to her tears. Now, they were listening to the gaps between her words, the gaps where the truth was hiding. They leaned in closer. It was time to push. And this time, they didn't believe her. Mary Katherine's reaction to the accusation was immediate. She broke down in the interrogation room. Tears streamed down her face. According to the investigators, that's when she finally admitted it. She told them she had pulled the trigger, out of anger. But just when they thought they had their confession, an unexpected problem surfaced. The room's recording equipment had malfunctioned. While the video feed remained intact, the audio was completely corrupted, drowned out by a strange, continuous static. The most critical moment, her confession, was lost. Every word she said was swallowed by the noise. It was a devastating blow. Their strongest piece of evidence, Mary Katherine's own admission, was unusable in court. Still, investigators pressed forward. They had enough to move on. Mary Katherine was arrested and charged with murder. The prosecution believed the rest of the evidence told a compelling story. The physical scene, the smell of alcohol, the chaos in the kitchen, it all pointed to something more than a tragic accident. The grease inside the gun barrel suggested it had been recently cleaned and prepared. This wasn't negligence. This was intent. And then there was dinner. Earlier that evening, Mary Katherine had cooked Stephen's favorite meal, roast beef. It was supposed to be a peaceful night, maybe even romantic. But not long after, the meal ended up scattered across the floor, and Stephen ended up shot. Detectives expanded the investigation by talking to friends and co-workers of the couple. What they learned shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Every single one of Stephen's friends said the same thing. "We're not surprised it was her." They described a relationship that had grown increasingly toxic over time. In the early days, Stephen and Mary Katherine had seemed like the perfect match, both adventurous, outdoorsy, passionate about hunting. But that facade quickly crumbled. Mary Katherine had become possessive, jealous, and emotionally volatile. Friends said she would scream at Stephen in public, shove him during arguments, and harass him with obsessive phone calls. One coworker remembered her calling Stephen 30 times before his shift had even started. And it wasn't just emotional instability, it was dangerous. Stephen had told friends she'd pointed a gun at him more than once. In fact, just a few months before his death, on April 21, 2018, Stephen sent a text to a friend. In it, he said that Mary Katherine had been running around the apartment screaming, threatening to shoot both herself and him. It didn't stop there. A month later, he sent another message. This time, the fear was palpable. He said something in her eyes had changed. For the first time, he believed she could actually do it, pull the trigger. That's when Stephen decided it was time to leave. He had found a friend in another city willing to split an apartment. The plan was simple: wait until Mary Katherine was at work, collect his things, and quietly disappear. He told no one except a few close friends. The date of his escape? August 3rd. But Stephen Freeman didn't make it to that day. He was shot on August 1st. He never got the chance to leave. Even though Stephen had never filed a police report, officers found that law enforcement had been called to their home 5 times in the past year, most for domestic disturbances. This wasn't a one-time explosion. This was a powder keg that had been slowly filling with tension, and finally blew. 2 days before Stephen Freeman was gunned down, things between him and Mary Katherine still carried the illusion of peace. On July 30th, the couple exchanged warm texts, sweet messages, the kind you'd expect from two people still in love. "Hope you have a good day," one said. "Love you," replied the other. From the outside, it looked like reconciliation. But in reality, it was the calm before the storm. By the next day, July 31st, everything unraveled again. Something triggered another argument, nobody knows exactly what, but it was bad enough that Stephen didn't come home that night. Instead, he stayed at a friend's house. He ignored her calls. Her texts. He even confided in his mother, saying flat out, "I'm not going back." He was emotionally exhausted. Whatever hope he had for change was gone. This wasn't a man cooling off. This was a man trying to escape. On the afternoon of August 1st, Mary Katherine was alone. She texted Stephen again, no response. In a last-ditch effort, she cooked his favorite dinner, roast beef, just the way he liked it. It wasn't just a meal. It was a message. A plea. "Come home. Let's fix this." But Stephen didn't show. He didn't reply. Growing desperate, Mary Katherine reached out to Stephen's mother, hoping to find out where he was. That's when she learned the truth: Stephen had stayed at his friend Thomas's house. Mary didn't hesitate. She got in her car and started searching. And soon enough, she spotted Thomas's vehicle driving through Griffin, Georgia, with Stephen in the passenger seat. She followed them. Then she pulled up alongside their car and rolled down her window. Her voice, sharp and frantic, cut through the wind. She shouted at Stephen, demanded answers, demanded to know if he was coming home. Worn out and cornered, Stephen relented. "Fine," he said. "I'll go home." Not because he wanted to. But because he was tired. Tired of running, tired of fighting. Less than 2 hours later, Stephen Freeman was bleeding out in the couple's bedroom. The trial that followed would dig up every painful detail of that night, and the years leading up to it. Prosecutors argued this was no accident. This was rage. Premeditated or not, they believed Mary Katherine snapped when her expectations, of reconciliation, of control, were shattered. They pointed to physical evidence. The handgun Mary used had grease residue inside, suggesting it had been prepped, not carelessly left behind. Blood splatter on the sheets concentrated in one section of the bed indicated Stephen was likely sitting up when the bullet hit him. No struggle. No chaos. Just a single moment, and a life gone. Then came the witnesses. Friends, co-workers, even Stephen's own family, all echoed the same thing. This wasn't a healthy relationship. It was toxic. Volatile. A pressure cooker constantly on the verge of exploding. And more than once, Mary Katherine had allegedly used a gun to intimidate Stephen. She was, in their words, controlling. Possessive. And at times, frightening. But what may have hurt Mary's case the most were her own words. Not the alleged confession, lost to the corrupted audio recording, but the multiple conflicting stories she gave after the shooting. 6 different versions of events. Some small changes, others glaring contradictions. And every time the narrative shifted, the prosecution said, so did her accountability. When the courtroom doors finally opened, the version Mary Katherine now told was different again. This time, she wasn't claiming it was an accident. She wasn't saying she didn't mean to shoot him. Now, she claimed she was defending herself. As the trial reached its most critical point, Mary Katherine's legal team stunned the courtroom with a drastically different version of events, one that painted Stephen Freeman in a much darker light. According to her defense attorney, the Stephen known to friends and family as kind, funny, and beloved was not the same man Mary Katherine lived with behind closed doors. The defense described a controlling, jealous, and at times violent man, someone who dictated what she could wear, how much money she could spend, and even how she prepared his daily routine. They said Stephen ruled every part of her life. She wasn't just his girlfriend, she was under his command. Physical abuse, they claimed, wasn't a rare occurrence. It was routine. Mary Katherine alleged Stephen once hit her on the back of the head and even kicked her so hard during a fight that she flew off the bed and slammed her head into the door frame. To back these claims, the defense produced 63 pages of text messages, furious, vulgar, and threatening messages Stephen had allegedly sent her during a brief breakup the year before. The catalyst? Mary Katherine had admitted to sleeping with one of Stephen's friends. His discovery of this betrayal, her lawyer said, had unleashed a barrage of digital fury. These messages were retrieved from the memory of her old phone, carefully preserved and presented to the court. Taking the stand, Mary Katherine was visibly emotional, her voice cracking as she described a life of constant anxiety. She told the jury she had to prepare Stephen's clothes and shoes every morning in a precise way. The bathroom had to be warm, towels folded just right, so he could step in and shower without lifting a finger. She said accusations of cheating were constant. And arguments, according to her, quickly turned physical, Stephen grabbing her wrists, shaking her, even hitting her. Her attorney read aloud from the messages she said Stephen sent. "The more you say, the worse it will be for you when I get home. I'm coming home to you, and it could end badly for you. You might end up in the Red Room tonight." When asked what the Red Room meant, Mary Katherine explained it wasn't a specific place, but a name she had given to nights when Stephen allegedly tied her up and beat her. Through tears, she recounted 2 separate incidents in which Stephen forced himself on her, ignoring her pleas to stop. One of them, she claimed, happened after a trip to Disneyland. Stephen allegedly told her he had spent so much money on her that he deserved something in return. And then came the night of August 1st. Mary Katherine testified that she had told Stephen she no longer wanted to be with him. According to her, he flew into a rage, throwing the food she had cooked, yelling, and finally shoving her. That, she said, was the moment she grabbed his gun, begging him to leave. Instead, he lunged at her. And in the chaos of that split-second moment, she pulled the trigger. She claimed she never intended to hurt him, let alone kill him. It had all happened so fast. But there was a problem, actually, several. The prosecution tore into her timeline. Why had Mary Katherine never mentioned that Stephen lunged at her during police questioning? Why were there no prior reports of abuse? No hospital records? No restraining orders? No friends or family who could confirm any of it? When pressed, she said she was ashamed. She believed the abuse was somehow her fault. That if she had just been better, Stephen wouldn't have gotten so angry. She said she couldn't bear to admit the truth to the officers who interrogated her. But then came a bombshell, from the prosecution. In a stunning reveal, data pulled from Mary Katherine's phone showed that just hours before the shooting, while she was babysitting and Stephen wasn't even home, she had visited multiple adult websites featuring violent and aggressive content. The implication was devastating. How could someone supposedly traumatized by abuse actively seek out such content? Mary Katherine insisted it was misunderstood. She said she was trying to learn how to please Stephen, not indulging in it herself. Her defense anchored its final strategy around the idea that she was a battered woman. They brought in an expert witness who testified that her behavior was consistent with battered woman syndrome. But the prosecution countered with their own expert, who said Mary Katherine exhibited no such signs. There was also a damning inconsistency. She claimed to have broken up with Stephen that day, yet she had spent hours trying to reach him, even tracking him down at a friend's apartment. She had cooked his favorite dinner. That didn't look like a breakup. It looked like a reconciliation. Still, the case was plagued by one critical flaw: the investigation. The prosecution had no usable video of her police interrogation, her confession video was entirely inaudible. Even worse, the gun used in the shooting had been mishandled by officers. Instead of documenting its position, photographing it, or following proper procedure, they had placed it in a paper bag for safety, afraid Mary Katherine might harm herself. Why they didn't simply remove her from the scene remains a mystery to this day. After hours of testimony, emotion, and contradiction, the jury was left with one question. Had the state proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt? They deliberated for just 4 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. Mary Katherine Hickden was acquitted on all charges. After the verdict, several jurors admitted they had doubts. Some believed she may have committed the act. But with no definitive evidence, no confession, no credible video, and no medical or police records to support either side, they couldn't convict. The case was riddled with holes. All they had was her word, and her phone. On June 26, 2019, Mary Katherine walked out of jail, a free woman. But for Stephen Freeman's family, especially his mother, it wasn't justice. It was heartbreak. She refused to let her son's memory fade into silence. In the years since, she has become a vocal advocate for male victims of domestic violence, reminding the world that abuse doesn't wear one face. It isn't always visible. And it doesn't discriminate by gender. Her message is clear and unwavering. Violence knows no gender. And Stephen Freeman's name is now part of that painful truth. Woman Detective, thanks for watching this episode of our true crime documentary series. If this case struck a chord, show your support, like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines. Here are 5 powerful lessons from the tragic story of Stephen Freeman and Mary Katherine Hickden. 1. Abuse can hide behind smiles, and it knows no gender. Most people saw Stephen as cheerful and well-liked, but Mary Katherine painted a different picture, one of alleged control and violence behind closed doors. Regardless of whether her claims were true, the case highlights a crucial truth: abuse isn't always visible, and men can be victims too. Society often overlooks male victims, making it harder for them to seek help or be believed. 2. A flawed investigation can derail justice. Critical evidence in the case, like the inaudible police confession video and the mishandled firearm, raised serious questions. When law enforcement fails to follow proper procedures, even the strongest case can fall apart. Justice isn't just about what happened, it's about what can be proven, and mishandling evidence can cost lives and verdicts. 3. Trauma is complicated, and so are victims. Mary Katherine's claims of abuse, combined with her behavior, like searching adult websites and allegedly trying to reconcile on the day of the shooting, painted a confusing picture. But trauma doesn't always make people act logically. Victims can send mixed signals, and that doesn't necessarily invalidate their pain. However, such complexity also opens the door to manipulation. 4. Digital footprints can tell a different story. Text messages and search histories played a major role in the trial. What we do on our phones can become evidence in court, sometimes revealing more than we intend. Your digital life leaves a trail, and it can either support your truth or destroy your defense. 5. The truth doesn't always win in court. Despite suspicions and inconsistencies in Mary Katherine's story, the jury acquitted her. Why? Because reasonable doubt is enough to free someone. In the justice system, it's not about what you feel, it's about what you can prove. Emotion doesn't outweigh evidence, and if the case isn't airtight, even a guilty person may walk free.